Hi there, welcome to another strategic thinking series. We've been recently talking about what should be considered as core processes for a vendor management office or a supplier management function. This is video 4. We are going to be talking about onboarding. Arguably, this is probably one of the biggest processes you're going to have to design and build, and is one of the more important. So what is onboarding and what should be considered as onboarding? So what you need is a robust and repeatable way to onboard vendors and suppliers or even customers to ensure that you've got 100% of the relevant data and you've extracted all the right terms. So if we break down that statement a bit further, we need to look at really what should this process consist of to be successful and what you need to cover. So first off, metadata extraction. So throughout the sourcing exercise where you found the vendor or supplier, you would have exchanged an element of detail, be it from addresses, names of people, dates, key information about the companies either side, company number, VAT registration, billing address, those kind of things. They need to be stored somewhere. So they need to be extracted out of what was the pre-sourcing system or pre-sourcing process, people's emails, spreadsheets and the like, and put into some central repository so that you can recall that key data in the future to use as is necessary. So that's the first part of the process, breaking down the metadata that was found pre-award to put it into a management system moving forwards. If you move on from that, there was also data that was likely to be found through the process, which is once the vendor got selected or shortlisted, etc., you might have started a due diligence exercise, or initially before that, you might have looked at doing inherent risk. And there's other videos about inherent risk and the importance of that. But inherent risk is effectively the risk of you getting a supplier to provide that product or service, right? So what is the associated risk? Not necessarily about the supplier itself, but about the thing you are doing with that supplier. What is the risk of that activity? And that should carry across into some kind of risk system or risk log out of that pre-sourcing process again. Coupled with that, closely aligned, is the risk assessment of the supplier vendor. So how they operate, how financially stable they are, where do they operate, all those kind of key questions that you need to do at the time of onboarding. That needs to be stored somewhere, because in a lot of cases, you will need to periodically refresh that data. And if that's stuck in some sourcing system, when you come to do that, it will be a pain. So that needs to be brought out into the system you're going to use to operationally manage the contract in life or the arrangement in life. Which leads just on to the contract, or the digitizing the contract, digitizing the agreement. You'll have a multi-page agreement with a supplier that details information like terms obligations. So where it says supplier shall, buyer shall, you both shall, those things need to be extracted along with the detail that either turns it into a data trigger condition or a timing condition over a certain period to say what each party should do. And they need to be put and structured in the right manner to ensure that they are clear in what they're asking to do, that they're time bound, that they're agreed achievable, that they're being assessed by the right people that are going to do it. So go through some kind of RACI exercise. There's other videos on why RACI is important. So responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. Who's actually responsible for that obligation? And along with that, extraction of the rights and key terms. So what rights the supplier has, what rights the buyer has, and any key terms that there are in there, such as termination and extension, renewal, right to continue, inflation, RPI, all those key information that you'd need to know about a specific contract. It could be determined, or it's seen as metadata, like we spoke about earlier, but it's in the contract in a contractual sense. That's why we put it under this part of the process. So once you've done that, you need to consider what is operational alignment. So when, and especially if it's a big deal, a big arrangement with lots of people involved, where is that pre-sourcing onboarding activity where it ends, and how does that align operationally within your organisation and the supplier organisation? If you're in the buyer side, you need to worry about the buyer. If you're in the customer sort of supplier side, you need to worry about who in your company is going to actually fulfil the contractual obligations. Leading on from the point we made about the RACI and who's doing what from an obligation perspective, it's who has responsibility for that contract in both organisations in live or in delivery, and make sure that's aligned and everyone's clear on whose responsibility is and what to do. Then at that period, much with the operational alignment, once that's aligned into the construct and the operating model of your business, you get to a point where you need to do an operational handover. So the project or the program to source and onboard and sometimes even implement will end, and there'll be a thing considered let's go live or in life. That point needs to have a handover part in the process that's considered as to how that handover takes place and what needs to exchange hands. At that point, or this point as well, you need to consider the governance model. So earlier we talked about segmentation, which was critically important, how critically important the vendor is to you or the supplier is to you. And given the outcome of that process, you're going to consider how extensively you need to govern the relationship and the contract as such. So heavy, mid, light, you need to have defined some kind of governance model that says heavy, meet with them a lot more, talk to them about a lot more things, mid, not so much, and light, don't meet with them very often and talk to them only about some key things. That needs to be considered at onboarding, but is a process in its own right. Also, compliance needs. So once you do that onboarding, what compliance needs are there? Is this a particular part of the business that's under regulatory scrutiny? How does it need to comply with? What standards are there? Especially in, like I've mentioned before, in the financial industry, there's regulations in Europe from the EBA and there's regulations in UK from the PRA that specifically say about critical and important suppliers need to be managed under a certain framework of things and activity that needs to be done. And there's about, depending how you look at it, 16 to 20 things that need to be done periodically. You need to make sure that those things are carried across at onboarding and are ready for the next periodic checkpoint. And then lastly, management framework. Spoke about management frameworks when we spoke about scoring. So if you want to look more about management frameworks related to performance scoring, what are the categories and subcategories that you're going to manage the supplier against and score them against that are relative to what they provide you with? Commonly, most organisations will have a core management framework they will use with all suppliers, but some suppliers, depending on what they provide, may trigger a different type of framework. So not just against price, delivery, quality, relationship. If they are a cloud provider or an IT service provider, you might want to put them against some kind of InfoSec cloud standard that you want to bolt on to the standard framework. Now, depending on what the provider or the supplier or the vendor is providing you with, will denote whether you need to bolt on parts of the framework or different things or different levels of scrutiny. So that needs to be considered at onboarding as well. That's onboarding, whether it be the vendor, the contractor or service. Those are the things that we recommend that you consider as part of your process design and all the things that should be included in an onboarding process to give it a chance of making sense in an operational and resilient capability that is delivered ongoing in the business. And back to the point we made about processes all the time, it is repeatable and well structured. Hope that was useful. Feedback is always welcome. Let us know what you need. If you think there's another process we should be talking about, please make a comment. Let us know. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
To keep up with the latest Brooklyn Vendor Assurance news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.